Okay, let's get started, everyone. Welcome to our 5 New Things series, our summer series, which have been very exciting. Nate Watson today is going to talk to us about sleep. Nate Watson is a full professor now at in our department. One of my favorite attendings when I was a resident, but then he dedicated his entire life to sleep, and so hopefully he's going to try again and convince me of its importance. Thank you.
All right. Let's see if I can get this on here. All right, Claire, thanks for those kind words. I really appreciate that. I didn't realize that until now. So, yeah, I think this is a neat little twist on this lecture series, 5 New Things, trying to keep things fresh, things that are interesting, things that are happening and changing in the field, and that's my goal today. Before I get to that, and I recently spoke to the residents about this, but I'm going to put it out there again, that the field of sleep medicine is a wonderful field. If you decide that you want to go into it, I suggest you do an elective with us, and then just to get a better idea of what's going on, and then our faculty are very interested in supporting young physicians in going into sleep medicine. So we have an ACGME accredited sleep fellowship here. It's a 1-year program, and at the end of it you'll be eligible to take the board exam in sleep medicine. So today we're going to talk about some new therapies, and there are actually I think 5 of them, and then we're going to talk a bit about consumer sleep technologies, which probably many of you have one or have used one, and then I'll touch on the Sleep Duration Consensus Conference at the end. So what about new therapies? So, we all know about CPAP. We have some idea about various surgeries that can be done to treat sleep apnea, and then we have oral appliances, which are custom fabricated dental appliances that people can have to treat sleep apnea. Well, here's some different options that are out there. This is oral pressure therapy, which essentially is kind of the opposite of CPAP in that it provides gentle suction in the mouth cavity here, and what it does is pull the soft palate and the tongue base forward to open up the airway. And so this is by a company called ApneaApp, and it's called Winx. And the advantage is it doesn't have a mask, so there's nothing on the face. Now there is something in the mouth, so you can't get away from having something touching you, but for some people the mask is claustrophobic, and so this might be a good option for those individuals. It involves this really soft and flexible tubing, and the device can track usage. So sleep medicine is one of the few areas in medicine where you really can track patient compliance very well, and the Winx can do this as well. One issue is you have to be able to breathe through your nose with your mouth closed in order for this to work, and we know that many people with sleep apnea are obligate mouth breathers, so that can be a challenge for some individuals. This company is actually developing the 2nd generation of this. They've had some issues with the comfort of the appliance in the mouth, and so they're tweaking it to try to make it more comfortable. But the data show that people that have used it have worn it about 6 hours a night, which is pretty good compliance. For CPAP, we consider compliance to be using the CPAP device 4 hours a night, at least 70% of nights. So 6 hours a night is good. And then you can see here they have the responders in the mild, moderate, and severe sleep apnea categorizations. But in those that did respond, they found a really great response, which was getting the AHI under 5, which is generally the cutoff for whether or not you have sleep apnea. The and response was defined as cutting the apnea-hypopnea index at least in half and getting it under 10. Why did some respond and others not respond? It just may be that there was an obstruction in some other part of the airway, maybe the nose, maybe in the other lateral pharyngeal areas. They're still trying to establish that. So not everybody's going to respond to this, but some people will, and those that do respond quite well. Another new therapy is upper airway stimulation. So you all will kind of recognize this as being similar to a vagus nerve stimulator for treatment of epilepsy, Well, this is actually a hypoglossal nerve stimulator for the treatment of sleep apnea. And so you can see here they have this generator. It's implanted in the chest subcutaneously, and there's this respiratory lead that's measuring respiratory effort. And then you have the stimulator up around the hypoglossal nerve here. And so it's timed to your breathing pattern as to when the hypoglossal nerve is stimulated. This was FDA approved in May of last year. It's actually a very novel treatment. It's the first of its kind for sleep apnea, and it's indicated for moderate to severe disease, and really mostly for patients that, for a lot of our treatments, patients that don't tolerate CPAP therapy for one reason or another. The major side effect was some tenderness of the tongue, because it would causing the tongue to protrude over and over again throughout the night against the teeth. And so when they ended up putting some a padding in there that resolved that, but otherwise it seems to have been pretty well tolerated. For surgical therapy, it's less invasive and it's reversible. So that's one advantage when you consider it in comparison to uvuloplatar pharyngoplasty, genioglossus advancement, and some of the other, maxillomandibular advancements, some of the other more invasive surgeries that are out there. So for this treatment here, this study by Pat Strollo at the University of Pittsburgh was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and you can see that they found a reduction in the apnea-hypopnea index of 68% at 12 months, reducing it from 29.3 to 9 events per hour. So 9 is still a little bit elevated, but nonetheless it's a pretty dramatic reduction. They found about 2/3 were considered responders, and response here was at least a 50% reduction in the apnea-hypopnea index and getting the AHI under 20. So that was their definition. And then, as I mentioned previously, tongue weakness and soreness was the major side effect of this treatment. I think the main limitation of this right now is we don't have a dedicated CPT code for it, and there's not that many surgeons that actually know how to put it in at the moment. So hopefully as we move forward and more people get this, surgeons will get more experience with it. It'll become more commonplace option for people that were not able to tolerate CPAP.
I assume you turn it off during the day?
That's right. Yeah, you have a remote control that can turn it on and off. Good point. You wouldn't want it happening, throughout the course of the day, firing. There's and then another one, newer therapy, is nasal expiratory positive airway pressure, EPAP. And so what this is kind of like CPAP, but not completely. So CPAP via a mask is applying pressure constantly. So you're exposed to the pressure when you're breathing in and when you're breathing out. Well, these EPAP stickers, and they're actually stickers that go over your nostrils. They're single use. They're about $2 a night. So and insurance presently doesn't cover it, but you'd get them, you go to bed at night, you put them on, and it allows free flow of air when you breathe in through your nose, and you can see that demonstrated here. And then when you breathe out, these baffles close up and you're limited to a smaller space. And so what that does is provide back pressure to keep your airway open. And this is something that has been effective for some individuals. The studies that have looked at it have shown that over half had at least a 50% reduction in their apnea-hypopnea index. And then if you look at those that they call partial responders, those with an AHI improved by 30 to 50%, you're getting up around, again, 2/3 of individuals having some kind of response to this treatment. And so this is something that is relatively well tolerated by patients, and it's nice because you can try it for a while. You give a person a 30-day starter pack and they try it, and they can decide if it's for them, if it works, if they feel better, if they feel like it's an effective treatment for them. So it does reduce the AHI by around 50% on average. They say a little over 55%, regardless of severity of sleep apnea. So I think it's something to consider for all patients that these other therapeutic modalities don't make sense or they didn't like it. So those are EPAP. It's called Provent. You order it through a DME company. You order a 30-day starter pack. And there's also an over-the-counter version called Theravent that obviously patient doesn't need a prescription for that. What's the difference between the two? I'm not sure. It might just be that you need a prescription for one and not for the other. But yeah.
What kind of insurance coverage is usually available for those compared to CPAP?
Yeah, their insurance doesn't cover this. So it's an out-of-pocket expense of about $2 a day, $60 a month. All right, positional therapy. So this is kind of a different take on what I like to call elbow therapy, which is your partner elbowing you when you're snoring too much, and then you roll over and wake up and stop snoring. This is also a different take on tennis ball treatment, which is what we used to tell people, just to sew a tennis ball in the back of their pajamas, and then when they rolled on their back, it would be so uncomfortable that they would just keep going to the other side. But anyway, it looks like a dog collar actually, which is kind of interesting as well. But it's called Night Shift. You put it on, and what it can do is it detects when you're on your back, and then it starts providing some vibro-tactile feedback that gently increases until you wake up enough that you change your body position, and then ostensibly your sleep apnea gets better and your snoring improves as well. And so that's a pretty simple idea, and it's really for patients with positional sleep apnea. And what I mean by that, you see individuals that their sleep apnea is much, much worse when they're on their back than when they are on their side or prone. And you can determine that from a sleep study. And so in this study, looking at 22 men and 8 women with a BMI indicating class 1 obesity or less, you see that 83% had a 50% drop in their apnea-hypopnea index, with a mean reduction of about 69% from 24.7 to 7.5. And you can see that most of that is driven by the supine AHI reduction from 45 down to about 5. And this study was done in individuals that were found to have positional dependent sleep apnea, not surprisingly. So works pretty well for that group, and I think it's a good option to consider. Positional therapy, it's not always something that we think about. I mean, another take on positional therapy would be to raise the head of the bed as well, because gravity pulls your tongue base back into your airway and your soft palate and can worsen sleep apnea. So another thing that sometimes we'll do is just encourage people to raise the head of the bed.
So, Nate?
Yeah.
You know, in a way, this is a treatment for snoring too, right?
Yes.
So what's the take on snoring? Of people who snore, how many have sleep apnea?
So Tom is asking, of people who snore, how many have sleep apnea? So snoring is a big risk factor for sleep apnea along with obesity. That's a bit of a tough question because not everybody has a bed partner to indicate whether or not they're a snorer. And so I think any estimates that are out there are inherently biased by that point. And we see that all the time in sleep clinic, that people say they don't snore, and the next question you always have to ask them is if they have anybody around that could say something about it.
But there are snorers that don't have sleep apnea.
There definitely are snorers that don't have sleep apnea, and there are definitely people with sleep apnea that do not snore. So that might be the best way to put it. Yeah.
How about the position of so sleep apnea with no position? Do you think that we can have sleep apnea with
So the question is, I didn't think you could have sleep apnea when you're sleeping on your stomach. I mean, it typically is always worse when you're on your back, but certainly we have many people that still have it when they're prone or on their side. So not everybody is it predominantly positional like it is in this study group. Yeah.
In your opinion, does this treatment reduce the quality of their sleep?
So the question is, does this treatment reduce the quality of their sleep? And yeah. That's, it may be a little bit, but because you're saying it's causing arousals that wouldn't otherwise be there, but they're having arousals from the sleep apnea that it's supposed to be eliminating. So I think that overall it would have a positive effect on a patient's sleep quality. So, all right, so that's positional therapy. And then another thing I wanted to mention was the orexin receptor antagonist class of medication. So as you all know, orexin or hypocretin is a neuropeptide that is produced and secreted from the dorsolateral hypothalamus that's been found to be deficient in patients with narcolepsy with cataplexy, which is really kind of considered to be likely an autoimmune disease. It has an association with HLA-DQ-B10602. Dr. Longstreth's group has shown that it's associated with a prior history of streptococcal infection. We know that T-cell receptor polymorphisms are also associated with narcolepsy of this kind. So anyway, it's thought to be probably an autoimmune disease against these orexin or hypocretin producing cells in the hypothalamus. So researchers and pharmaceutical companies have used that knowledge or leveraged that knowledge to develop a hypocretin receptor antagonist, which is a treatment for insomnia. And so this is a drug with a new mechanism of action to treat insomnia, which has just recently come out. Unfortunately, they have not yet developed a hypocretin/orexin receptor agonist, which would be a great treatment for narcolepsy. But hopefully someday that will come as well. So this medication is called Belsomra, and it was FDA approved in August of last year. It like I mentioned, it has a novel mechanism of action. Not surprisingly, the most common side effect would be drowsiness. And here's some of the studies that have been done on this medication, and you can see over here we're looking at basically sleep onset latency, and you have a reduction of 10 minutes at 1 month and 8 minutes at 3 months in that compared to placebo. And then if you look at what we call wake after sleep onset, which is just what it sounds like, it's the amount of time you spend awake once you've fallen asleep, that was reduced by 45 minutes at 1 month and 42 minutes at 3 months. So the medication has shown efficacy in randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials. And it's something that we're just starting to use. Actually, I haven't prescribed it yet, but I think it's interesting in the fact that we're always looking for things with novel mechanisms of action. And so just be aware, if you have that really difficult insomnia patient in your clinic and you feel like you've used everything that's out there, this is another option. Now, one other thing I want to be sure and point out is that none of these medications would be my first line therapy for insomnia. Of course, I would want to refer the patient for what's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which has been shown to be as effective, if not more effective, than medications long term to treat insomnia. And what that is a number of visits with a trained, usually psychologist or psychiatrist, but a sleep physician can do it as well, that teaches the patient strategies for how to manage their insomnia and kind of, and then can do things like sleep restriction. So you can restrict the amount of time that the patient spends in bed, and then you measure their sleep efficiency, and when the sleep efficiency goes up, you can slowly increase the amount of time that they're in bed, that kind of thing. So just be aware, CBTI is a very important treatment for insomnia to be aware of, and in my next section of the talk we're going to discuss that there are some online platforms out there that you can refer patients to get that treatment. So in addition to the new treatments coming out that I mentioned, the hypoglossal nerve stimulator, the WINKS system, and the new hypocretin receptor antagonist medication, there's other things. So Respire is starting to use 3D printers to create custom-made CPAP masks. That's a real plus. I mean, we have many patients that, everybody's face is a little bit different, and some people have faces that we can't find a mask that won't leak. And so hopefully this kind of custom-made mask will address that issue in those challenging patients. And then there's a researcher at University of Pittsburgh who's looking at a cooling cap for a treatment of insomnia. So it's really just putting the frontal lobes on ice at night, and there's some research to suggest that that's effective as well. So we'll keep our eyes out as that research gets done and those treatments come to market. All right, so let's switch gears to my second topic here, and that is...
Nate, can I
yeah,
ask
Bruce.
you one question? We always hear about placebo effect, and it just struck me that I wasn't sure I'd expect a placebo effect for a soporific, because some people believe that the placebo effect requires the conscious involvement of one's psychology. But here's an instance where you're falling asleep. So do soporific drugs, is there a placebo effect?
There is, and we see that here, and that was the thing when I looked at this study was that, you know, the placebo at month 1 and 3 reduced sleep latency by almost a half an hour. So that just, I think, gets at, you know, insomnia is such a multidimensional disease, but particularly for psychophysiological insomnia, people they get themselves psyched out about their sleep, you know, that they begin to associate their environment with not being able to sleep, and that's why they sleep better when they travel, or they'll come to the sleep lab and say that they sleep better. That should never happen. I mean,
Actually, I like that a lot.
right? I mean, you're hooked up to all this gear and you're in a weird environment and there's somebody watching you all night long, and you're going to sleep better in that environment than at home. So I think it just kind of speaks to that psychophysiological insomnia component of things. So I want to take a quick show of hands. How many people here have used a Fitbit? You got a hand, or any of these wearable? How many people have used a sleep app on your iPad or your phone? Okay, so there's a lot more of you. All right, so that's what we're going to be talking about here. These, what we like to call as consumer sleep technologies, and these are computer-based systems that the general public can access to monitor sleep, and the primary goals are listed here. You can see a lot of them: sleep induction and wake induction, self-guided sleep assessment, entertainment, social connection, information sharing, and sleep education. So, let me go back here. Yeah, so we did a search recently. Actually, our fellow who just finished, Teresa Coe, who you all know, she was a pediatric neurologist in our program, and she was probably one of the best fellows, Sid, that we ever had in sleep medicine. We were really sad to see her go. But we did a project together where we did kind of a review paper on this topic. And when we looked at, did searches for sleep, we found more than 500 results in Apple iTunes App Store, Google Play, and Microsoft Windows Store. So there's so many products that are out there. And it was also recently one of the highest funded devices on Kickstarter, generating $2.4 million in financial backing. So there's a lot of interest in these things, and you can see here that it's just exploded. So since about 3 years ago, the thousands of fitness trackers sold has just gone through the roof. You can see Fitbit's kind of dominating this space right now, but there's also Jawbone, and Nike has a product as well. But over 3 million fitness bands were sold just between April and March 2013, or over a year from April 2013 to March 2014. And one of the top apps in the iTunes App Store was a sleep tracker and alarm clock. So there's tons of interest out there. And when I learn about this, I kind of have, it's a good news, bad news thing, because it's good news that people are interested in their sleep, because I think that's the first step towards a healthier sleep life. The bad news is that generally speaking, we want to take the technology away from sleep instead of injecting it into sleep, for a lot of reasons. But perhaps the most important is that these screens emit light which stimulate your circadian pacemaker to keep you awake. Be that as it may, this is happening, and we need to be aware of it. So, they're over the counter. They're mostly available without a prescription. And patients do bring these things to us in clinic and ask us to interpret it for them. So we have to be aware that that is going to happen and be prepared to answer some questions. And there's lots of issues, as with the case with many technological advancements, these social and ethical and legal aspects to it that nobody has any idea what impact it's going to have, but it's out there, and it's going to touch on these areas. And so we're going to talk about a few of these devices. I can't talk about all of them, obviously. Talk about a few, give you an idea about the different types that are out there. So we like to split them up into mobile devices, so those are your iPads and smartphones. Then your wearables, which is your Fitbits. There's some that are embedded in your sleep environment, so like something that would be put under your mattress or on top of your mattress. Then desktop or websites, those are still out there for people to access to try to help their sleep. And then accessory appliances are things that you would buy specifically to monitor your sleep and put in your bedroom environment. So this is Sleep Cycle, and I suspect many of you that have accessed an app related to sleep probably got Sleep Cycle. And what it really does is use the accelerometer in the phone to try to assess whether you're asleep or awake. So you put the phone on under your fitted sheet, and it measures movement on the mattress, and as a result it claims to be able to tell you when you're asleep and when you're not asleep. And it also claims to be able to tell you if you're having regular or irregular sleep or disturbed sleep and that kind of thing. And in addition, it has a function which is a smart alarm, which is kind of neat because what it allows you to do is to set a range of times in which you would want to wake up, and then when the device senses that you're moving around a bit, which would likely be a time that you're awake or in lighter stages of sleep, it would wake you up then, as opposed to a time when you're not moving at all, which might be a period of time when you're in REM sleep or N3 sleep, and we all don't want to be woken up out of those sleep stages. So that's kind of a neat little aspect of these devices. It also allows you to input data into it and track it over time. So here, you can enter whether you had coffee or if you worked out, and then it can kind of assess the days that you did that and then look at what it comes up with your sleep quality score and see if those things are good or bad for your sleep. So those of us that travel, we struggle with jet lag. That's a real big problem. How do we work around that? Well, Entrain is an app that was developed in order to help with that. So it basically you put in where you're leaving, where you're going, and the times that you're going, and it tries to help you create a pre-trip sleep-wake schedule that prepares you for your new time zone. And so it's kind of a novel way or a tool to help prepare you before your travel to manage the jet lag that will inevitably be waiting for you when you arrive there. Here's a Go to Sleep app that was developed by the Cleveland Clinic. So there's not that many apps that have been developed in conjunction with sleep physicians. This was one that was. So it's one of these where you put in your lifestyle and sleep habit data over time, and it allows you to track it and gives you a sleep score and things like that. So it's not really measuring anything unique. It's just a tool to allow you to track your sleep. All right, let's talk about the wearable platforms. And as we showed you, mostly this is about Fitbit, but that's not the only device that's out there. These devices are they're nice because you wear them, you don't have to mess with them, they just do their thing, right? And that's why people love them. And they use an accelerometer, much like a clinical grade actigrapher, which we utilize in sleep clinics sometimes as an indirect measure of sleep and wake. So that's what this really is. These are indirect measures. Nobody's measuring EEG. We all know, we're all neurologists. The only way you really know if you're asleep or not is to see sleep on an EEG. If you're not doing that, then you don't know. But anyway, these are measuring movement. When there's no movement at a time when you're supposed to be asleep, then they call that sleep. They claim to be able to differentiate between light sleep and deep sleep, and I'm not so sure how they're doing that. They don't really explain it very well, and without measuring the EEG, I don't know how they can figure that out. But this is the kind of data that you get from Fitbit. It could give you your sleep efficiency, which is the time that you're in bed trying to sleep, that you're actually asleep. Normal is going to be 85% or higher. It also tells you your sleep duration, which is something that we're keenly focused on in sleep medicine. This is the Jawbone Up device, which is also worn around the wrist, and it also provides a similar type output here. And again, you can see they kind of differentiate between what they call sound sleep and light sleep. And maybe it's really an algorithm that's measuring how much you're moving, and if you're not moving at all, they might be calling that sound sleep, and if you move a little bit, they might be calling that light sleep. I mean, I don't know. They don't explain it to us. They just make these claims. This is called, so if we're talking about the wearable platforms, there are a number of other ones. One is called Basis Peak, which is here in the middle, and that measures a few additional components such as sweating, skin temperature, and heart rate. And so it integrates that information along with actigraphy or motion information in order to give you some output that can, again, claim to tell you when you're in REM and when you're in deep sleep, which I assume would be what we would call N3 or non-REM 3 sleep. We used to call that delta sleep or stage 4. And there was one study, they said they did it at the San Francisco VA hospital. You read the paper, they don't describe the methods very well. It's not really clear how they're arriving at this. And this is kind of true of all of these things. When you try to get more information about, what are the algorithms, what are they measuring, how are they making their claims, it's just not there, and they're not going to tell you. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. There's also a wearable platform that's a baby monitor. Here it's this little turtle-shaped device that's on this baby's abdomen. It can measure their body position, their breathing, and their temperature, and send it via Bluetooth to a smartphone for output that looks like this. So it tells you if they're awake or asleep, what they're, gives you you can actually listen to their breathing. What, are they on their stomach, their side? Obviously we want babies to be back to sleep, so this is important. And then you can measure it over time, and in claiming to tell you if there's active or quiet sleep, and again, what that means, nobody's really sure. All right, embedded platforms are something that you would put like in your bed, and usually these are mats that are put under you or under the bed itself. So the Tanita Sleep Scan is one of these mats that has a vibration microphone, so it can record breathing patterns as well as heart rate and movements, and it can also adjust the temperature of the mattress to somebody's preference. So this device can also provide information much just similar to the other ones. You can see here it's in some Asian language that I don't understand, which I probably shouldn't have even put it up there, but here they have wake and light sleep and deep sleep, so they're making similar claims, somehow obtaining that from information. And breathing patterns might be one thing that could help, because when you're in deep non-REM sleep, N3 sleep, you do have a more regular breathing pattern. So it's possible that if you're collecting that information, that could be helpful as far as a deep sleep claim. For REM, it's also possible that breathing depth and rate might help, because in REM you're kind of breathing as if you're awake, because you have this context of this dream that's going on, and so there's irregularity of breathing in REM, and so that might be the way that they make that claim. Again, they don't specify that. There are some websites and some desktop platforms. So the MedHealth Sleep Tracker allows you to enter and track sleep patterns, bedtime, wake time, sleep quality, things like that over time, and then it gives you a printout that can provide you long-term information about what your sleep quality is. And then there are the online cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia programs. So I would encourage you to be aware of these, and if you have a patient that has an insomnia complaint and you're not getting anywhere with them, then you may want to consider Shut-Eye or Sleepio. And the patient goes in, they log on, it's an educational program, they get personalized sleep recommendations, and they can log some of their sleep behavior in. And there's some studies that show that it is an efficacious treatment, so you don't have to have a live individual sitting across from you doing this with you. And obviously this is important because there are not that many board-certified behavioral sleep medicine specialists out there. There's only like 200 in the whole country. So there's a real access problem with this, and we know it's effective. So think about this when you have the insomnia patient. Of course, when you have an insomnia patient, sleep apnea can present as insomnia, so you always want to ask those questions too, because we'll often treat the sleep apnea and the insomnia will improve. But sleep-EO and shut-eye, 2 options for you and your patients. There are various apps out there that can help a patient measure how well their treatment is working. And when I'm talking about treatment, I'm thinking about CPAP. So these are apps that can assess nightly usage, residual apnea-hypopnea index, air leak, and other data. The manufacturing companies, ResMed and Respironics, also have apps that do that kind of thing. And it's the beauty of sleep medicine that we really have the ability to measure compliance and measure these factors and help drive a patient's health care by showing them, you know, how much or how little they're using it, or how effective or how ineffective the treatment is. So Clocky, now this is a diabolical invention here. So this is the alarm clock for the person that can't wake up no matter what. So what it does is you set the alarm, it goes off, and then it rolls off your bedside table and scoots off into a random corner of your room, and you have to get out of bed and crawl around on the floor and find the darn thing in order to turn it off, and then hopefully by then you're awake. So we might want to put this in the resident sleeping room over at Harborview. I don't know, but
you know, if it administered a small electrical shock when they finally found it, that would be the final touch.
Yeah, right.
Suggested to manufacturers.
Yeah, or have a little latte automatic latte machine on it. So things can always be improved. Anyway, that's Clocky. Other accessory appliance platforms, this is really interesting, the ResMed S Plus. So this is this little device, you buy it, you put it at your bedside, and then, you know, it tracks breathing and movement in bed. So it actually uses radar to track these things. And then it also can measure, you know, aspects of the sleep environment, such as temperature and things like that. And then it provides nature sounds that it times to your respiratory rate, which is supposed to be more relaxing. I don't know. And then Mind Clear, which is a recordable to-do list before you go to bed. And that's kind of a cognitive behavioral therapy recommendation for people that are chronic worriers, to have a worry journal before they go to bed, 15 minutes, write down everything you're concerned about, close it, put it away, go to bed, don't think about those things anymore. So that's the S Plus. There's also this one, the Sense with Sleep pill, which is similar, but you know, also measures temperature, light in the bedroom, noise throughout the night, and I think particulates. So it measures the air quality, and in addition, so you know, getting maybe a little bit more sophisticated about assessing your sleep environment and making it sure that it's optimal. You know, we always like a cool, dark, quiet sleep environment, and that's what the goal of the Sense with Sleep pill is. And then the Withings Aura, which is a standalone bedside device, but also an embedded device that you put under your mattress. And it also measures all those aspects of the sleep environment that the Sense with Sleep pill does, but it has this light, and it emits blue wavelengths, which are the most stimulating to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your circadian pacemaker, in the morning, and then red light at night, and so that's supposed to kind of help guide your circadian rhythm into a typical sleep-wake type pattern. And this device, you know, with the embedded component, can also measure movement in bed, and so it's able to kind of have this indirect measurement of sleep duration and sleep quality as well. All right, well, that's all really cool, but I mean, what are the issues with all this stuff? So as I kind of mentioned, there's not much validation, okay? And then when there is, it shows that the device might not be as good as you think it is. So for instance, the Fitbit was validated against polysomnography, and it was found to overestimate sleep duration by about 67 minutes on average. So if you're wearing one of these things, you're not sleeping as long as you think you are. Okay, I'm sorry to break the news to you. Then they have these algorithms and this specific technology, but it's all proprietary. It's not publicly available. You call these companies, they don't share it with you, and they're not really interested in publishing validation data because their technology might be debunked or labeled inferior, and so why would they bother? Plus, this space moves so quickly. By the time they validate whatever it is that they invented, something else is going to come along that everybody's going to be on to. And so it doesn't make sense. They just put these things out there as entertainment devices, and it's up to you to decide whether or not you believe what it's telling you. They're not that interested in validation because they can profit off of it whether or not anything's validated. But I think here there are some things that some advantageous aspects of it. So that it measures, these devices that measure ambient noise and air quality and temperature. We're not measuring those things currently in the home sleep environment, and it's very possible that we should be. That those are really important aspects of a person's sleep quality and sleep health. And then the other thing is that comparing these consumer sleep technologies to standard tools might be like comparing apples and oranges, in that they measure factors may not be the same, and whether or not it's clinically important is unclear. And I think that gets back to my original point that it's good that people are interested in their sleep and they're using these devices, because I think that's the first step towards a healthier sleep life. And I can certainly imagine the bedroom of the future where you walk in and the lights dim and the curtains come down perfectly and the temperature gets exactly the way you want it and your air is filtered out and your bed, right? I mean, there may very well be this kind of idealized bedroom of the future. Hopefully that's what these technologies are working towards, rather than injecting all this technology into your bedroom that you're going to be interacting with that's only going to be stimulating and ultimately is going to be contrary to falling asleep. So here's some other up-and-coming technologies. There's and one I'm going to tell you about that we've been working on here at the University of Washington. But before I get to that, there is an app called Snore Sounds. There's a company called Appian which is pursuing FDA approval for this, and they claim that they're able to measure aspects of snoring that can determine whether or not a patient has sleep apnea. So I think, Tom, getting back to your question, not everybody that snores has sleep apnea, and not everybody that has sleep apnea snores. I'm interested to learn more about snore sounds, because if you don't snore, how does this even work? But nonetheless, this study showed a pretty good correlation between the smartphone estimated snoring time and polysomnography snoring time, and then also the RDI on the phone compared to polysomnography AHI. And then here's an embedded device that you put under your mattress called the Sonomat that also found a pretty high correlation with AHI compared to traditional polysomnography. Now, the one issue with that is you got to deal with this mat. You got to buy the mat. You got to stick it under your bed. What if you're sleeping somewhere else? What if you travel? That kind of thing. So what you really want, I think, is something that's contactless. You want to assess the patient without touching the patient, and that's what we've been working on here at the University of Washington, and I'm going to show you this video that'll give you more details.
Sleep apnea is one of the most common diseases out there. It affects quality of life, it causes sleepiness and insomnia, it's associated with heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and increased mortality. It affects over 25 million Americans. And the thing about it is most people that have it don't know that they have it. ApneaApp is something that a person can use on their phone in their home sleeping environment that can give them an indication as to whether or not they may be stopping breathing in their sleep. When we measure sleep now, we have people come into the sleep laboratory typically for one night. You come in, you're spending about 12 to 14 hours here. You get hooked up to a lot of different equipment. We put electrodes on patients' heads. We also measure breathing at the nose and the mouth. We measure their heart rate. We measure leg movements. Then we measure respiratory effort. You are kind of hooked up to a lot of equipment.
Kind
In a
of.
bedroom setting, you could think of a person who's just going to sleep. He can just turn on our app, press the record button, and then place the phone on his sideboard, just regular how he would leave it for charging, and then sleep. That's it. We are turning the phone into an active sonar. The concept is similar to how a bat works. So we emit an inaudible signal using the phone speaker, and these signals would get reflected off the body, and it's recorded by the microphone. It actually monitors your abdominal breathing motion, and then it also detects all the other motions like leg movement, overall body movement, etc. When there are two people, they are actually at different distances from the phone. So our signal actually converts each of this distance into a unique frequency pattern in the phone. In order to test ApneaApp, we actually worked at the UW Harborview Sleep Lab. So we actually placed the phone running our ApneaApp on one corner of the bed. And then we compared the results which we obtained using our ApneaApp and the original polysomnography test. We conducted this test for around 40 people and got an accuracy of about 98%.
ApneaApp is still in the developmental stages at the moment, but we do believe that ApneaApp has a lot of potential. We feel that a very simple way for people to indicate whether or not they have sleep apnea in their home sleeping environment has tremendous potential to help people live happier, healthier lives.
All right, there you go. Hey, who doesn't want to be happier and healthier? I mean, come on. The other advantages of this are it's at home, so it gets at this notion of the first night effect that we talk about in the sleep lab, which is it's such a strange environment that you got to take everything with a grain of salt, and then you could measure somebody's respiratory pattern and sleep over multiple nights instead of just one night. So it might be ultimately more ecologically valid than coming into a sleep lab and having all of this equipment hooked up to you. So, I think there's an M-Health revolution going on, mobile health. It's going to touch all of our practices, not just mine. We all need to embrace it because it's coming, and maybe even think about ways that we could use technology to diagnose things. And we'll see what becomes of ApneaApp, but I think certainly sleep medicine is moving in this direction. So when you talk about all of these devices, there's one big issue is the social and legal issues, and that example here really drives that home. So last year there was a pretty big earthquake in Northern California. It was the worst earthquake in 25 years. It was rated a 6. And you can see it hit around 3 a.m. And these are all jawbone wearers in the region. And they were able to assess what percent of wearers were actually awake when the earthquake hit. And so, the closer you were to the epicenter, the more likely you were to be awake and to stay awake. Okay? Really cool stuff that this technology is showing us. However, if you bought one of these things, did you agree to be in anybody's study about whether or not you wake up when an earthquake hits? No, you didn't. And so this is the kind of thing that I think has to be considered when we go with these kind of broad population-based devices and all the data that's out there in regards to health. It's one thing to mine data in Twitter, but it's another thing to mine data that's related to your own personal health. So the FDA is aware of this, and they're getting on top of this. And presently, they're going to only apply regulation to mobile apps that they consider to be medical devices or that could pose a risk to a patient's safety if it didn't function properly. So if it's a device that just kind of, you track something, like Go to Sleep, where you put your bedtime and wake time and all these things, and it gives you an idea of what you're sleeping like, that wouldn't need to be FDA approved. ApneaApp, if we want to claim that it has diagnostic capabilities, then obviously that does require FDA approval. So this is an area that's rapidly developing, and the FDA is aware of this, and I think that it's going to be a great challenge for them. They don't like consumer-directed diagnostics like this because things that aren't prescribed. When something's prescribed, then the physician is culpable if something goes wrong, right? But if it's a consumer-directed device, then the FDA is responsible if something goes wrong. And so they're having to grapple with the fact that they're going to have to assume more responsibility for these things than perhaps they'd like going forward. So the future directions, we need more validation studies. Just in general, we need to know more about how these things work, and we need more input from physicians who practice in these areas in the development of these devices. And we have to be mindful that technology in general is bad for sleep. The alarm clock was the first piece of technology put in a person's bedroom, and it's been downhill ever since, I would argue. Ideally, we would all go to bed when we're tired, and we would wake up spontaneously when we feel rested, and then we would go about our day. Now, I realize that is an unrealistic expectation, but somebody's got to take that position. And so we just have to be aware, if we put apps and things in people's bedrooms, that it might have a kind of an observer effect or an untoward effect on sleep health. And then the FDA issue, we really need a good regulation of these mobile health apps going forward.
Nate Watson
Yeah.
for president. Who's behind him?
All right, so the last thing, and I mentioned this when I talked to the residents earlier, but I have to bring it up again because I feel it's quite important. So at the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, we recently have a grant with the CDC called the National Healthy Sleep Awareness Project. It's a 5-year grant, renewable every year, and it's focused on accomplishing the four sleep health goals as defined in Healthy People 2020 that we all know is a federal initiative to improve the health of the U.S. population. And so we want to increase the percent of people who pursue diagnosis and treatment of sleep apnea from 30% to 33%. We want to reduce the rate of vehicular crashes per 100 million miles traveled due to drowsy driving from 2.7 to 2.1. And we want to increase the proportion of students in grades 9 through 12 who get sufficient sleep. That is, I believe, about 30% of them are currently getting sufficient sleep. We want to increase that about 2%. And then the proportion of adults who get sufficient sleep, increase it from 69.6 to 70.8%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a statistically significant change. And just getting back at the drowsy driving goal, there was a recent AAA Foundation for Safety study that came out that showed that 21% of accidents that result in a fatality involve a drowsy driver. So when you think about transportation safety, don't just think about drinking, drugged or distracted driving, but we also need to think about drowsy driving, and the sleep community is working towards that. So anyway, in an effort to try to accomplish the goal to get adults to get more sleep, I was recently on a flight. I got this Time magazine, saw this article about the power of sleep, got excited because I like seeing things that have a positive message about sleep. And then as I read through it, it became apparent to me that there's confusion about how much sleep is enough. So first here they say getting the recommended 7 to 8 hours each night can improve concentration and sharpen planning and memory skills and so on. Then going on later, they say it's no surprise that more than half of adults don't get the recommended 7 to 9. And then further, they say that people who sleep less than 8 hours don't perform as well on concentration and memory. So is it 7 to 8? Is it 7 to 9? I thought 8 was okay. Is 8 bad now? And then at the end, they get back to the 7 to 9 recommendation. But what it really means is that we didn't have a good recommendation out there for people. When I'm at a cocktail party and I'm asked this question, I usually say it's the amount that would allow you to remain awake and alert throughout the day without use of stimulants. And everybody needs to determine that for themselves. It's going to be probably different for everybody. But we decided to convene a consensus conference with this goal to develop a statement regarding the recommended amount of sleep for a healthy adult to maintain optimal health. So we decided this was a massive task, as you might imagine, so we broke it down into these categories and subcategories, which are, there was a body of evidence out there in each one of these categories that we could touch on in order to get an individual recommendation that we could then collapse into one main recommendation. So we did our original literature search, we didn't put any time restrictions on it, and found over 5,000 research studies. And that made my heart skip a beat, because how the heck do we get that trimmed down? Well, I went through every title and eliminated those that did not meet our criteria. So we're just looking at people age 18 to 60. We were just interested in sleep duration, not quality or fatigue. Anything related to a sleep disease was eliminated, and anything assessing the effect of controlling how much you sleep on as a treatment was eliminated. Anything looking at sleep and shift work was eliminated. And really, we just wanted to assess sleep duration's effects on human physiology. So we trimmed it down to about 1,200 studies. Then we went through all the abstracts, got it down to 331. And we focused on those that just made the cut for Oxford grade 1 or 2 studies and meta-analyses, and we got it down to 129 at the end. And as I was looking at it, it became clear to me, when you think about sleep duration and health, there's really two different conceptualizations. One is shown here with the U-shaped green curve, and you see that in a lot of the epidemiologic studies, particularly that look at mortality and metabolic outcomes like obesity, that suggests that there's some kind of optimal dose of sleep, below which and above which it's bad for you. Okay? Then you have what we call the sleep saturation model, which is maybe not necessarily linear, particularly at the higher sleep durations, but it says that, you know, more sleep is better. And certainly, you know, when people are sleeping around 6 hours a night or less, more is definitely better. At longer durations, you know, you can have a conversation about that. But as we went through it, we ended up publishing this in June, and we recommend that adults should sleep 7 or more hours per night on a regular basis to promote optimal health. So we put a minimum cutoff instead of a range, and you all may have seen things with a range out there suggesting 7 to 9 hours or something like that. We didn't put a range in because a range inherently implies there's a sleep duration above which it's bad for you. And we know there are circumstances in which sleeping longer is okay. For instance, if you're recovering from sleep debt or sleep deprivation, or if you're recovering from illness. And following the Bradford Hill criteria for causality, we couldn't come up with a biologically plausible way by which sleep in and of itself could be bad for you. And then that, coupled with the fact that there are almost no experimental studies that look at the effects of sleep extension. And so, you know, if you want to tell me that more sleep is bad, then, you know, you got to prove it in the laboratory. And there's tons of studies that bring healthy individuals into a lab, get them to sleep 4 hours a night for a week, and show that their blood glucose goes haywire and their dietary hormones go haywire. But there are no studies, and that they can't do psychomotor vigilance tasks, their cognition is impaired, but there's no studies saying, let's bring everybody in and get them to sleep 9 or 10 hours a night and then measure that. Those studies need to be done if these claims are going to be made. And we know we made an impact with this because we were covered in the Seattle Times on the lower half of the front page down here, actually the same day that we met Caitlyn Jenner up there at the top. So you know that it was a newsworthy story that we were happy to get out there. All right. But the reason we're most happy about this is we provided this information to the CDC. And much in the same way that, you know, we didn't really move forward a public policy and research agenda on obesity until we defined what obesity was. And there was a lot of controversy about that for a number of years. And then finally, they said, it's 30. You got a BMI of 30 or above, you're obese. And then once you get that, you can start doing things like this, where you can look at national data that the CDC collects and assess what's going on in the country. And so I took this picture of my colleague Janet Croft, who's at the CDC, who's beginning to use this 7 or more hour cutoff to apply it to the data that they have to start looking at on a county by county basis. And you can see, so the areas that are in red are the areas that are not achieving this goal in general, and the areas in blue or purple are the ones that are. And you know what, isn't this kind of like where the stroke belt is down here? Somebody can, maybe will, is there so down here, so you know, I think that there's going to be a lot of information that we can glean from this, and we can overlay this with you know, suicide rates. We can overlay it with a lot of different things to look at the relationship between how long you're sleeping or whether or not you're getting enough sleep, and a lot of bad health outcomes. And then the other thing you can see is that in some of these purple areas there's little squares of red, and in some of the red areas there's little squares of blue. And so for these areas, they're thinking are actually related to areas where there's a high number of retirees, okay? And then over there, the red areas are areas where that might be Indian reservations. So it's kind of starting to tell a pretty cool story here. So, you know, but there were a lot of questions that came out of this process, and actually we have a manuscript coming out in Sleep. It's going to come out on August 1st, where we talk about all the assumptions and go through the process that we went through. And I think one thing that we have to address is, again, getting back to this notion of ecological validity. Most of the research studies that look at sleep duration, the experimental studies, which is the best research we have, was done in healthy individuals in highly controlled laboratory experiments where they were severely sleep deprived. Is that really the way that we all kind of live? I mean, the problem in society is that we all have this kind of yo-yo sleep schedule where we're sleep deprived a little bit during the week, and then we try to catch up on weekends, and so we're sleeping less and more and less and more. I mean, I think we need to do research that kind of assesses that dynamic relationship rather than just this kind of more artificial assessment in the sleep lab. You know, there's other research that clearly needs to be done. It'd be wonderful if we could have a biomarker of sleep need or sleep deprivation, so kind of like a hemoglobin A1C for sleep. You come in, you tell me you're sleepy or you have sleep apnea, let's measure this, and then we treat your sleep apnea. We can show you that this got better. Not only clinically would that be important, but also from a public policy and transportation safety standpoint. You know, we have laws in some states that you can be held criminally culpable if you injure another person if you're driving while drowsy. New Jersey is one of them. But it's really hard to prove, as you might imagine. So, but if you had a biomarker, you had a sleepalizer, let's say, then I think that would move that public safety agenda forward big time. You know, sleep duration is just one component of healthy sleep. You have to have good sleep quality. The timing of it has to be right, so you need to be doing it at nighttime. And the night to night, there has to be consistency to it. So you got to have all those things in order to really accomplish healthy sleep. And so we're just touching on the sleep duration, but hopefully in the future we'll get a more nuanced understanding of this by factoring in all these other components of healthy sleep. So anyway, I appreciate everybody your attention today. You know, we talked about the therapies, the implantable hypoglossal stimulator, the Winx device, the night watch, the suvorexant, and the Provent. And then we talked about all the consumer sleep technologies, focusing on wearable devices, those that are standalone, those that are on computers, those that are you place in your sleep environment. And then lastly, the Sleep Duration Consensus Conference, which recently came out, and we're hoping will continue to help move the sleep health agenda forward, where we're always pushing for people to believe that healthy sleep is important to their overall health as a good diet and exercise. And I've gone over just a little bit, but with that, I'll wrap things up, and thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Well, I was impressed by your advocacy for the app for detecting snoring, because as you say, many people have no clue, and by the time they find out they have heart rhythm abnormalities and all kinds of stuff like that. So there is another sound related effect in sleep that I have no idea what the meaning of it is. So people who grind their teeth night after night after night, is there anything that points to something abnormal in their sleep?
So talking about bruxism so that you can audibly hear, and pointing to a problem with their sleep. I mean, yes, we see, so people that have sleep apnea generally have more bruxism. Sleep apnea is a trigger for bruxism. So, and anything that disrupts sleep is a trigger for bruxism. And we do see bruxism on polysomnography as artifact in our EEG leads, a rhythmic artifact in EEG leads. So it can be an indicator of sleep apnea. Of course, it can occur outside of that as well. And mostly treatment's focused on getting a night splint to wear to preserve your teeth. All right. Yeah.